traffic.
That's fine. We can,
Where do blankets come from?
I mean, these are just like a massive amount of definitions, so you can do whatever.
In case of prolonged meeting, break out blankets.
Well, you guys changed the procedures to the majority to extend the meeting.
I don't want to do that. Until 11. And to allow people with specific knowledge to speak like that depends upon the chair to say, excuse me, but we're already aware of that knowledge. You know, so now that an onus falls on the chair to
Mayor, we're ready whenever you're ready.
potentially interrupt people.
Right. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I will call the, Before we start, as I usually do, if you have a cell phone, please turn it off or silence it. I will call to order the Oregon City Regular Commission meeting for Wednesday, May 15th, 2019. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith. Here. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Here.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Here. If you please stand and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, under ceremonies and proclamations, we have 19-292, proclamation declaring May 19th through 25th, 2019 as National Public Works Week. Mr. Lewis.
Dang.
What?
Possibly your shortest presentation ever.
There is no presentation on this one, so, yeah.
What's with the rock?
That's for a later story.
Okay.
Hopefully a short one.
Well, yeah, it's American Public Works Week. We like to honor that, and it's typically honored by the state as well. And so we just included that proclamation. We've done that every year. You don't necessarily have to, if you'd like to read it, we'd love you to read it. If you'd rather not, we understand.
Oh, it's you guys. I'll read it.
Thank you.
So, whereas public works infrastructure, facilities, and services are of vital importance to sustainable communities and to the health, safety, and well-being of the people of Oregon, and whereas the quality and effectiveness of these facilities, as well as their planning, design, construction, are vitally dependent upon the efforts and skill of public works professionals, engineers, managers, and field personnel in the public and private sector who are responsible for and must plan, design, build, operate, and maintain the transportation, water supply, water treatment, solid waste systems, and structures and facilities essential to serve our citizens. And whereas it is in the public interest for the citizens, civic leaders, and children in the United States of America to gain knowledge of and to maintain a progressive interest in and understand the importance of public works and public works programs in their respective communities. And whereas the efficiency of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff Oregon City Public Works Department is materially influenced by the people's understanding of the importance of the work they perform. And whereas the National Public Works Week was instituted in 1960 by the American Public Works Association to call attention to the importance of public works in community life, and the United States Senate passed a resolution affirming the first National Public Works Week. And whereas the year 2019 marks the 59th annual National Public Works Week, and it should be recognized with the theme Public Works, It Starts Here. Now, therefore, I, Dan Holliday, Mayor of Oregon City, do proclaim the week of May 19th to 25th, 2019 as National Public Works Week in Oregon City, and urge all citizens and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works, and to recognize the contribution which public works professionals make every day to our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. Therefore, in witness thereof, I am here to set my hand this 15th day of May 2019, Mayor Dan Holliday.
Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate that. The department.
Okay.
appreciates that.
I've got a couple of appointments and I didn't see them in my packet here. Oh, here it is. Here it is, I got it. So I am appointing Rita Mills to the Citizen Involvement Committee as the McLaughlin Neighborhood Alternate Representative for the remainder of the two-year term ending December 31st, 2019. And appointment of Suzanne Jefferson to the Library Board non-city resident position for the remainder of the four-year term ending December 31st, 2019. Back to the agenda. We now have citizen comment. Do we have any citizen comment?
Yes, 3.
Okay. So if I can get to that on the floor. Where are they?
They
Carla
should.
Laws?
I don't- Oh, they're there, okay. Carl Laws and Amy Wilhite.
Oh, I'm gonna go, Betty Mom's with Carla.
Did you write a card and submit it like everybody else?
Yes,
That's a lie. Carla,
yes.
go ahead.
My name's Carla Laws, and I live on Roosevelt Street. I'm Barclay Hills Neighborhood Chair, and I'm coming on behalf of Barclay Hills Neighborhood Association.
So we get 5 minutes.
Thanks for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Technically, no, this is citizen comment. Go ahead.
So I'm coming because we're inquiring, we spoke to Public Works about the crosswalk across Grocery Outlet and Barclay Hills Neighborhood Drive, that it's hard to see people. I've driven there personally, it's very dark, it's really hard to see people, very unsafe. People have been hit there before, obviously, one guy in our neighborhood association. And we have been concerned about it as a neighborhood. So one of us has spoke to John at Public Works about there's equipment available to install, but it costs extra because they have to outsource the installation. So we're wanting it to happen sooner rather than later and trying to make that happen. Officer Willard and Officer Wadsworth also support that to happen. So we're wondering if you guys could help us out.
So what happened was
Name and city of residence for the record, please.
Betty Mom,
Commissioner Mom, go ahead.
I'm speaking on behalf of Barclay Hills Neighborhood Association. I live in Oregon City. Thank you very much. So a little history, we had Metro Enhancement grants where information was given out to the neighborhoods. So we were gonna apply for a grant to ask for help with that intersection that she was just talking about. And so while we were doing our due diligence, I called John Lewis and asked him what would be the cost of that light being put in there, a push button light. And he
Talking
said,
about a crosswalk,
Crosswalk.
like the library.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
so he said that that intersection was actually on their project list and that they had the equipment, I guess, that they took from 12th and Washington. So we just wanted to know how we could, where it's at on the list and how we could move it up on the list so it happens sooner than later.
Especially with what happened on Pearl Street, and a lot of those crosswalks are hard to see, but particularly this one.
And as the neighborhood, we're willing to get out there and dig ditches or chop trees or whatever we need to do because it needs to be everybody working together to make it happen. So
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
No chopping trees.
We look forward to that.
So just a quick question, Tony. Would Metro Enhancement money be able to be used for that?
Sure.
You said yes?
It could be used for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to clarify the answer.
So in comparison to other crosswalks, does it represent a safety hazard greater than others? That's
Chief
what's being
Van?
said.
It's a pretty dangerous, it's a dangerous crosswalk, that they all are, is the problem. I'm not aware of somebody being hit there, at least not in the recent time. We've, not just pedestrians, but vehicles too. It's a pretty a dangerous place to pull out, dangerous location.
Okay.
Just my feeling is safety issues move to the top of the queue, but that needs to be justified. That's all
But
it is.
there's a lot of those. I mean, I've been
I know.
called several times about adding one of those to cross to Hillside Chapel. The problem with Hillside Chapel is that you've got basically a blind sight line until you cross the hill. And if you've got traffic backed up for that light, now you're, asking for a lot of rear end crashes. So, I'm gonna leave that to, Public Works and the police department about, where they think those priorities lie. Certainly taking into account the comments from the community. Mr. Gifford and Ms. Wilhite.
Ladies first.
Oh, he called your name first. I have two comment cards filled out. The first is for me. I am Amy Wilhite. I'm a resident of Oregon City. And recently I received a notice about a land use action in the Gaffney Lane neighborhood. And I noticed that the sign-in sheet that was attached to the application was from 2 years ago. And I had a concern about that because a lot has happened. Particular project is on First Street, and a lot has happened in the last 2 years. So I was surprised that they could not need to come to the neighborhood and re-up and so I brought it. Unfortunately, I just have come back from vacation. I wasn't at the last CIC meeting. I sent a letter to Christina asking her to bring it up, but a lot of the details got left out. When I was doing my research, I noticed the application for the Cove Part 2. I believe the sign-in sheet they used was from 5 years previously, and it was part of the initial Cove. So I have a little bit of concern about there not being any kind of a timeline from when a developer needs to come to the neighborhood and when the application is deemed complete. And so that's something that I would like to be considered. I'll bringing it up to the neighborhood and to the CIC again, but I just wanted to bring that up, that is a concern that I have because a lot happens in time. And when I'm not talking about it's been approved and things changed and they just ran out of money, I'm talking about before it's even approved, especially big projects, but that's my concern. So that's as me as a private citizen. I also come now,
Yes.
I just have a question, and maybe Laura can address this. Why would they be attaching a sign-up sheet to a notice?
Applicants are required to provide as part of their submittal, the sign-up sheet for the neighborhood association to prove that they went to the neighborhood association. And so it wasn't attached to the land use notice, but it would have attached to the application.
To the application.
Which the notice refers back to.
Okay, well, obviously, I am of the opinion that a notice from 5 years ago and a notice of 2 years ago is not sufficient. They need to have, it needs to be current. That's just seems common sense to me.
yeah, that language isn't in the code.
Well,
And I would agree with you, Commissioner, and with you,
sometimes
Ms.
we
Wilhite.
don't have to have everything in the code, it just makes sense.
Yeah, I was surprised I hadn't realized that.
So
They could use
Good
one.
thing you were looking at it.
Yeah.
if I may,
Thank you.
Ms. Turway, aren't sign-up sheets an item about sign-in sheets, part of the code revisions that we're looking at?
Yeah, there are some revisions as it relates to that neighborhood association meeting and how you prove that you've had one. As part of the red lines, we want to propose, actually, the package includes removal of that sign-up sheet, but it does include confirmation that the meeting actually happened. So there is confirmation that the meeting happened. The sign-up sheet is less relevant because it doesn't matter how many people came to the meeting or who came to the meeting. It matters that the meeting happened as far as our code criteria are concerned. And a lot of purpose of the neighborhood association meeting is to put the neighborhood on notice and to allow that conversation to happen so they can listen to the public.
Okay.
It's all non-binding.
I'll be up speaking to that when
Hang on,
it's that
but
time.
sign-in sheets are generally included as part of their minutes, which shows that they were there, so I don't see how that's irrelevant.
In the proposed code amendments, it requires that there be confirmation that the meeting be held, not the details about the meeting.
By who is confirming it? The applicant?
Okay, hang on. So this time is for citizen comment.
I
It's not a
understand
time to
that.
have a policy discussion, so.
I'm
if you-
just asking a question.
Well, it's for an item on the agenda. I was just asking if it was in the comments so that we can return to
We
the
can return to
subject
it.
when we
Right.
get that to
Thank
agenda
you.
item.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Are you
Okay,
finished?
that was my private. Now I have for the Gaffney Lane neighborhood. I have my 5 minutes, right?
Well, technically, under citizen comment, that's not true.
Okay, then I'll
So-
take 3. It's not even gonna take 3.
Okay, all right. I just want to be clear on this. That 5 minutes is under public hearings, not under public comment.
Okay, because we've always been told that no matter what, it was 5 minutes. So if you're going to be changing that, whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The Gaffney Lane neighborhood has been concerned, and I've come before you before with the Malala Avenue project. I just wanted to follow up on that. We did send a letter. I myself have been out of town, and I know that John has been out of town also, but I want to make sure that the points then, especially the documentations we've asked for, that we have a time frame and that we can expect something to happen. I don't want it to just fall through the cracks, that we will actually see some response and some action.
I'm pretty sure we've all read the letter, so.
Well, I thought the letter was professionally written. It challenged a number of things. It calls into question some studies done and their value. And I think we owe the community a response to those, because essentially that letter that your organization wrote essentially is a rebuttal of some facts put forward by the city. So I believe, what's our plan to answer that letter? Is it directed to you, John, I presume?
Yeah, I think the staff were waiting until I got back to respond to that
Well, certainly.
letter. And we've got the traffic study that was performed for the 30% design work. We have that. It's a 160-page document. I want to make sure that it answers the questions that have been asked with regard to the traffic study piece. And yeah, so it's well noted that we've received comment, not just from the neighborhood, but from many folks. And as asked, we're logging those. And I think it's a bit of a timing issue, because some of those questions can't be answered right now. We're not even quite ready for that, right? So trying to answer some of those questions in a responsible manner, I think may take some time, but it's fully our intent, well before the next set of plan reviews or open house comes out, that we will get that information back to the neighborhood. And I really haven't even really had a chance to touch base with Amy on our intent or timeline for that. So
Okay.
I guess I'd like a little bit of time before I just jump out and say when.
In fairness to you, I recognize you just returned from vacation, but I do feel I've read the letter 3 times to make sure I understood it. And I'm not sure what can't be answered on it. I mean, the question is, what studies justify a signal here versus not here? It's a very specific, well-written professional letter, and I would encourage us to respond to it on a point-by-point basis if we can.
I agree. I appreciated the letter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wellhite.
Thank you, Amy.
Mr. Gifford?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome back. Welcome back, John. And Commissioners, my name is William Gifford, and I live in Oregon City. I wasn't going to make any comments, but
What? You always say that.
What?
during the ceremonies and proclamations, it seemed as though, I was a little disappointed that there was no mention of the fact that this is National Police Week.
I didn't
And-
know.
And today happens to be Peace Officers Memorial Day, which is why the flags around town are flying at half-staff. And I just wanted to read one little factoid I came up with. According to the Concerns of Police Survivors, I've never heard of the organization, cute acronym, COPS. Concerns of Police Survivors, about 140 to 160 officers are killed in the line of duty each year. Since the first known line of duty death in 1791, more than 20,000 U.S. law enforcement officers have died in the line of duty. That breaks my heart. And I just hope that we can take a second or two anyway to recognize the sacrifices that these men and women make for our safety.
Thanks, sure, well said. Is there any other citizen comment? Seeing none, we'll move on. Everybody okay with the agenda?
Yes.
No.
What?
No. I would like to have item 8A for discussion, just very brief discussion.
Okay, we can do that when we get there.
Yes, thank you.
So we are on to public hearings. And we are now at Development Code Amendments, including equitable housing, planning file LAG 18-00001. Ms. Turway?
Thank you very much. We're down to the last couple of issues for direction from the commission for our code amendments, which do include that bulk of work for the equitable housing project. For this process tonight, I recommend the same process that you've been using, where you move immediately to public comment, and then after public comment, we'll walk through those issues one by one in search of direction.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on this?
Yes, Amy Wilhite.
It's new.
Maybe you want to grab a chair in the front row.
I'm being banished from my row. Amy Wilhite, citizen of Oregon City. In respect of the sign-in sheet being removed from the application packet when a developer comes in, one of the concerns that we've had, and the reason that my belief is that with the sign-in sheet is required, is to get a good look at who's actually there. When you go back in time and they say, oh, we came to the neighborhood, and you look and only 2 people that live in the neighborhood were there, the other 6 were the presenters. When we're looking at an overall, is this the best way to do land use? Those are very helpful to have, to make decisions on. You know, they might not be looked at in the moment when the application packet comes in, they just check off a box that it was there. But when we, as the CIC or the commission wants to make a decision, they can go back and look and see, hey, how helpful is it to have the developer go? Is this the best way? So I would recommend leaving that sign-in sheet as a requirement. Also, to the 300 feet notice, I would like to see it expanded. I found that's one of the things that's come up, and I just want to reiterate that. When we're looking at, again, it kind of goes hand in hand, how many people came to that meeting. And if you send out 300 people to the 300 feet, you might only hit businesses in some circumstances. You might not actually even hit a house. So I would recommend looking at, and I know that's something that was brought up, other jurisdictions, and stretching that out there. Let's get the best input that we can. Thank you.
Thank
Do
you.
you have a number in mind? Number?
I have not.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Let's take a dirt.
No.
Okay. Last chance to comment on this before I open the public hearing. Mr. Gata?
I also wasn't planning on saying anything. Tom Guile, Oregon City. But what Amy just said prompted something. We just looked at this at the Planning Commission, and I was the only one who disagreed with everybody about the 300 feet. I guess this state has 100 feet, if I'm not correct. And some people do a little bit more, but I'm thinking of when we're doing all these concept plan areas, some people, as Amy just said, some of it are just businesses, some of them are just locals within that area. To me, it needs to be expanded. We were looking at an option of 600 feet, but then I know some of my fellow planning commissioners felt 300 feet was enough. But when you've lived out in these concept areas and you heard from the Beaver Creek people or the other ones, they say they never get notifications. I'm not quite sure why. I guess there's a cost involved, and that's what one of the planning commissioners brought up. There is a cost to send those postcards out. I don't think it's that much. And as I said, why is it that the city picks up those when a developer or someone is asking to be annexed into the city? Why aren't they picking up the cost of that postcard to send out to let people know about this rather than the city? They're the ones asking to come into our city and not the other way around. That's number one. Number two is what Amy addressed about these signatures is I'm not quite sure why you wouldn't want that list of signatures attached to anything. So all the commissioners can see, as she said, is there just 2 people? Was anybody interested? Was there any concern? Sometimes these meetings can have quite a few people in them. I mean, I've been involved in the Park Place neighborhood for years, CIC for years. And it really helps to know how many people really care to show up and if it's an issue of great concern. And I think when you're all making a decision, you would be interested in seeing, well, how many people actually showed up to hear about this. So I'm not sure if are we cutting down an expense not to include that with the packet? It just doesn't make sense to me that it's not included in that. So anyway, back in that on the notification, we were having this discussion, I feel like people just don't read the newspaper anymore. I know we have a website for the city, and we're trying to get people to sign up. I'm about to write an article about communications for the Oregon City News, but people don't read the Oregon City News to know about communications, that we actually have an email list they can join and find out. But a lot of people don't even know that. We've got to find a better way to communicate, and I don't understand why we have to limit it to 300 feet. Thanks.
I'm going to comment on that, Mr. Guile.
Yes, sir.
Simply that the report says only 3% of people respond to those. And I think that we're missing the point. The question is, why do only 3% respond to it? Is it because of lack of understanding, lack of quality information, or they don't care? And I don't think it's the last. I think it's the quality of information they get.
And I think that somebody brought that up. Sometimes it is so detailed oriented. You read it and you just toss it because it's so much. If there was a simple card, something saying to the effect that there is a meeting that's involving your neighborhood, and for more information, come to our website. That might drive more people to the Oregon City website also. And if you want more, join our website or our email list. And that's one.
I've had it drilled down, and that's an exercise that a lot of people don't want to go from document to document to
Oh,
document.
those little postcards. I mean, you need a magnifying glass to read it.
Understood. Thanks.
Anybody else? Last chance. Bob? Commissioner Mahoney?
I have a comment after the esteemed Mr. Mahoney gets done with regard to the city's notice.
Bob Mahoney, Oregon City. As you know, I'm on the Planning Commission. 95% of the people really don't care, Commissioner O'Donnell. They don't. They don't care
Nobody's
enough.
qualified to say that.
They don't care enough to run for your seat or anybody's seat up here. Only 5 of you care enough in this community to run for office. 95% of the comments that we get at the Planning Commission level are superfluous. They don't apply. It's just a motion. They haven't read the staff report. Not in my backyard is the idea. If all of those comments were taken to the LCDC or taken to the Court of Appeals, the judge would throw 95% of that stuff out. We're required by law, as laymen, a few of us were fortunate enough to practice land use planning and have enough experience to separate the dots, the commas from the dots, from periods. These are hard sayings. I understand that. It's hard to admit it. That's what you people have been elected for, is to sift through this stuff based on information that comes from your professional staff, Department of Public Works, Planning, Attorney, Engineering, and put that into the record as findings. Now, this is tough, and this is why you were elected to make those tough decisions. You are the authority. These people here are the technocrats. The public, God bless them, and I believe in citizen participation, but you can only ask a horse to come to the trough. After that, it's his business, what he wants to do. And that's what we're saddled with. This is our responsibility that we've accepted as appointed and elected officials. Nobody else is going to step up to the plate. I will. I care enough. You don't see this auditorium behind me, this room behind me, filled with citizens that care enough to get up from that TV and come down here, because their interests aren't involved tonight. And yet, look what you're thinking about here. There's certain things you control, certain things that you can't. And it's up to you to decide what you can control and what you can't. Cost of labor, construction costs, cost of land. You're never going to control that, not in this day and age. That's when the state takes over the industry. You know what that's called. So we gotta put on our flak jackets and our helmets and go into battle. And that's what we do every time we have a public meeting, is we gotta sift through this stuff and hope that it'll stand up in court, especially in the state of Oregon. Okay, thank you very kindly.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, now, last chance. All right, and we're done with public comment, and we are going to move into the public hearing for PC 19-044 Development Code Amendments, including equitable housing. Ms. Turway.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm going to be giving the presentation this evening. We are,
And you are?
I'm Pete Walter,
Thank you.
planner. And, let's see. This one is-
Does it have batteries?
Oh, is it? Well, we'll see. I think it's the server's having a problem.
Yeah, can you advance? Thanks. So we're discussing 4 topics this evening and 3 other topics that were sent back to the Planning Commission. Shelters, lot size reduction, minimum parking standards, and tree removal in annexation areas. The Planning Commission items that were discussed are the owner occupancy requirement for accessory dwelling units, the mailed notice radius, and residential uses in the historic commercial zone. Next slide. Firstly, with shelters, as proposed, the code is written that to allow shelters as a conditional use in residential zones for up to 10 beds in the mixed-use corridor and in the mixed-use downtown zone, but not within the downtown design district. It would be prohibited in all other zoning designations. And we have a zoning map to refer to. The next slide. What we've also discussed and what we've just talked about in the memorandum are consideration of various types of shelters and whether or not to break those shelter types out and treat them as permitted uses with use-specific standards, such as day shelters, warming and cooling shelters, and emergency shelters, and any other standards that the commission feels might be necessary to address the impacts of these different uses, including, for example, capping the number of days of occupancy within overnight shelters and that sort of thing.
Seems like you're missing one type of shelter.
Transitional housing.
Yeah.
Transitional, yeah. So what we wanted to discuss is what does the commission want to do as far as breaking out all these different types of shelters and provide direction to staff? And we will write the code necessary and come back to you with that as a proposal at the next hearing. And if we want to discuss this now, we can.
Yes, let's take them one at a time. So what's the pleasure of the commission?
I know that we were unable to receive any definitions from the Office of Joint Homeless Services from the city in Multnomah County, and I don't feel comfortable with moving on with these because I still don't agree with these definitions, and I'd like to see us consider some broader scopes for these definitions. So I don't know if that's not going to help try to answer these questions.
Just to point out to the commission, we did revise the memo on day shelters. So we revised this packet. So this is all you need to know for this on the memo that's revised for day shelters. We did get a chance to talk to a couple different groups, including that group as well. And we included their definitions in there. So they're called A Home for Everyone is the City of Portland, Multnomah County, Home Forward, City of Gresham. And then there's some other stuff from also just City of Portland as well listed, but we can come up with definitions. I think the overall broader question is, whatever you call these things, do you want to treat them all the same, or do you want to treat some type of shelter differently? This definition of shelters, which encompasses all shelter types, was called transitional shelter, and we kind of went back and forth and we changed it to just shelter at the planning commission level. So we can work on definitions. It's more the broad policy direction of, do we want to treat something like a warming or a cooling shelter differently than shelters that are there every day of the year or overnight shelters? Do you want to treat shelters that are open just during the day as permitted and make other types of shelters not permitted? So we can structure the code when we come back and look at definitions a little bit later. We're just looking for some direction on
I'm just,
what you
I'm
want.
at the spot where, I think any shelter except in those areas that we've already permitted in the code, right? Because there are a couple of spaces that we have permitted in the code.
Individual tax law.
The-
Those are the individual tax lots for the Father's Heart and.
Well, that's one of the ideas that's being discussed.
No, nothing is
Not yet.
listed as a permitted use for shelters in the code. And what we had done in years past for the winter warming shelters is we exempted the planning code because we didn't have any language or process to deal with it. And so now we'll have that process with whatever direction.
It seems
you
to
give
me
us.
that we should, that any of these should be a conditional use in any zone.
That is what the proposal from the planning commission says, is that they're a conditional use only in certain zones. And then in the residential zones, it limits the number of occupants to 10. But it puts them as conditional uses in MUC and MUD.
I think it should be conditional use in residential zones as well.
And sorry, my apologies. It is a conditional use also in residential zone, but it maxes out the number of people to 10.
Right, okay.
Do we have a slide on that?
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Go back to,
I'll make a couple of comments. First is that definitions are critical. And every one of these definitions fails in one respect. They talk about a reasonable amount of time. For example, the transitional housing. It provides permanent housing within a reasonable amount of time, usually 24 months. There's never a limitation on how much time within how much time. That you can stay there for 6 months in any 1 year period. What bothers me about every one of these definitions is there's nothing in there about I stay there for 6 months or 24 months, I move out for 1 week or 1 day, and then the clock starts over. That is deficient in every one of these. And I read every one, and I read the sources where you got them.
Well, can I comment on that, Commissioner?
And I know your previous comment, Mayor, about somebody's going to occupy them regardless.
Well, there's that, but more importantly, do we really want to be in the business of trying to regulate that kind of housing?
Yeah, I think we keep talking about, how do we police these type of things? And I think we owe it to this community. I mean, I certainly feel that my first obligation is to the people who've established their homes in this community. And I'll stand by that regardless of what the public feedback is. And I just think this is something, starting to put transitional housing in neighborhoods. If you start reading it, what's the plan for ongoing monitoring? None. What's the plan for the type of people that are going to set these things up? In the absence of a fee, essentially none. What costs has this city incurred and continues to incur as a result of these type of things? And we can talk about that later when we talk about fees. But I mean, I think we need to be in this business. And, I wish some of the people were here today that represented some of these shelters, because I'd like to hear some kind of summary about regionally, what are we doing regionally, not just Oregon City? So I'll just leave the comments at that for now.
So, if I may, I think that they need to be separate definitions, and so that we can have more control over which zones they're allowed in. I am not in agreement with any transitional housing or day shelters in residential areas. So I'm assuming that when I make these statements that we're parsing out all of these different types. So transitional housing, day shelters, the warming and cooling shelters, and then I still think it sounds like we're probably still gonna need emergency shelters in the case of a natural disaster or something like that we would want a provision to allow us to do that. So, I also am very cognizant or remember all of the comments we received about the cost of conditional use. And so I think the conditional use piece is a separate conversation. I spoke with Laura today. My concern is that that the public will think that because we put a conditional use on it, that means that they can show up at a hearing at the planning commission and complain about it or not be in support of it, and that the planning commission has the ability to say, well, no, we'll side with you and therefore you can't, you won't do it. And that's not the way conditional use works. The public can show up at a public hearing and they can complain about it, but if legally, if all the boxes are checked, the planning commission cannot refuse the application. And so I want to make sure we don't send a mixed message that, oh, it's a conditional use that's going to be reviewed. Well, it is, but that doesn't just mean that if a community is unhappy with it, that they can show up and the planning commission has the grounds to say, we hear you, but I'm sorry, it's a legally allowable use, and so therefore you're just stuck with it. So
Well, that depends on the makeup of the planning commission as well, because there is some history of the planning commission sending us rulings that were patently unenforceable. So.
okay, so I'm not going to go into the history of the planning commission or decisions that they've made in the past regarding the time issue. I think we're making a policy decision based on whether or not we want to allow and support homeless shelters, period. It is up to the director of that homeless shelter to monitor who they allow in the doors, how they operate it, how long they stay, what the programs they put in place. It's no different than a landlord who is trying to manage their tenants and trying to deal with the system in which they have to work within in order to manage their tenants and so on and so forth. So I am actually personally okay with the definitions, some of the definitions that are in here. This is a hefty topic, so I'm not sure how we're supposed to tackle it, but I guess I would just start and say there is a statement in the staff comments, and I'm okay with it, for transitional housing and day shelters, allowances. You're saying the word shelters, so I'm being more specific. Transitional housing and day shelters.
What document are you referring to? Because I have two here in front of me.
The summary document, isn't it?
Yeah, the topics identified for direction.
The summary document,
Yes.
it's first document.
And it's page 2. Requiring communication between shelters and the public, being permitted in the mixed use commercial or mixed use MUC corridor. Mixed use corridor. As I knew commercial wasn't right. It wasn't. Yeah. MUC 1 and 2 MUD except the downtown design district. I'm stopping short. I don't agree with conditional use for 10 residences in residential areas, and I'm looking for more input. I guess I would consider conditional uses for medium and high density. For medium density up to 10 residences, and then high density for 11 plus personnel. And the only reason I can get there is because I'm looking at those chapters on medium and high density, and they're talking about they allow assisted living, group homes, stuff like that already in the specifically to those densities with that type of split of up to so many residences for medium and up to so many beds for high.
Hey, Bill, before we get too much further down the road here, where do we start running up against the Federal Fair Housing Act?
I wish I could give you a clear and concise answer, and this is, you always tell me this is what you expect. It depends. I can't tell you that much. We have had a discussion recently about, one of the things you can't do is enforce a variety of vagrancy and home and other things if you don't have shelters available in the region. How big that region is, we don't know. In terms of fair housing, you can't discriminate against people in certain circumstances. And typically, when I think of that, it is, someone who has a disability of some sort. How homelessness plays into disability, I'm not certain that's necessarily a disability. However, a lot of the homeless population tends to have a disability. There's plenty of people who who are homeless for other reasons, but that's certainly something that I think is a valid concern to bring up. How that plays out if somebody were to attempt to put a homeless shelter in a residential area and how the Fair Housing Act would affect that. I don't think I've seen that yet, but it's something I think the more we have opportunities for homeless shelters elsewhere, the less that's likely to be an issue in the future.
So let me ask you this, if we did this conditional use, we separate the day shelters / emergency shelters from transitional housing, would the Roosevelt Street Mike Cross house still be able to go in without any kind of conditional use or anything else?
That is correct.
And that's because of the Federal Fair Housing Act, is that right?
No, it's because it's, operates like a single-family home. It's about the activities that occur on site.
That's confusing to me.
These even talk about provision of services by those homes.
There are no services that are provided at that site.
That's what we keep being told.
If I own the home and I have 8 of my friends live with me, I mean, that's,
Like in Eugene?
well, that's, but, whether that's, who the people are, if they're
Right.
not receiving services,
Right.
that's where we've run into this issue on the Roosevelt Street.
So you're in the same thing as the transitional housing for drug-affected mothers. They live together in these big places, but they don't really give any services. They communally live with washer and dryer and shared kitchen and all that, and that can't be regulated either. Is that correct?
Basically building code regulations, but yeah, you can't prohibit people who, you can't limit it just to nuclear family type of situations.
So I'm trying to drill down to this residential zone and 10 or fewer beds. Can we really do that?
Well, I think you're providing a service through the shelter,
Oh, okay, all right. I
right?
can buy that.
If you're a state licensed shelter.
Right, I mean, we're
Yeah,
trying
it's
to identify.
it's state license.
But you're talking about
Yes.
overnight residential zone, 10 or fewer beds. What service are they providing?
A bed?
A bed in a state licensed shelter.
Do these things have to be state licensed?
Isn't it in our code? I think it's in our
Yes.
code that it's state licensed.
I think this might be fairly relevant to the conversation in that one of the things that happens, and for instance, a couple years ago, the county puts out an RFQ, and they will put something,
Request for qualifications.
there you go. And what that is about is, so they'll put out for a warming shelter, and in the past, Father's Heart has applied for that, and so they get money from the county to house people at night. What the services are, what they provide, I don't know. We also had another conversation with the commission before about, I can't remember it, the retirement center, whatever it is, down on Washington Street, pretty close to your place.
Yes, Oregon City Retirement Center, yes.
Where they had done the same thing, where there was a conversation with the county about would they be able to take money from the county to provide sheltering? And there was a conversation about whether or not it would be sheltering just when it's cold, or there was a definition that I remember that they had, and there are different definitions in the homeless, in the caring for homeless world about up to 6 months. There was some form of transitional housing where they will allow people to stay there for 6 months.
So I think, to follow up on that a little bit, to qualify for certain streams of funding for these types of things, there's certain licenses that are required. If somebody decided they wanted to open up a homeless shelter in their basement, not get any funds and just open it up to, invite 5 people to sleep in their basement, we can't really get at that except through building code and health and safety issues.
Okay. Commissioner Smith, you have anything?
Not at the moment.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, please. I do not support allowing any of these uses as an outright permitted use in any zone.
Which we are not, right?
Well,
My proposal was.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and the recommendation, I've disagreed with staff that I believe that regardless of how well they're run, I still think that the community deserves to have some input on what is going on in their particular areas, and being in a neighborhood where we have a facility that has had an impact on not only the neighborhood, but the city as a whole, I think that it is the responsibility of this commission to make sure that concerns are addressed, that people have an opportunity to talk about it in a logical manner. I don't think that this is going to be as emotional as people think it is, because it's really a matter of just having a discussion. And I think originally we had talked about, well, they just had to have a meeting once a year. That's not sufficient, because circumstances change and things happen. I don't really want to see us get into a situation where we've got 15 facilities or whatever they're calling themselves, like on Roosevelt Street, that is causing, that is unfortunately causing some problems in the neighborhood. It's just, you know, I just think it needs to be equitable on both sides of the issue. No matter how well-meaning a person is and wanting to help, they have an obligation to be a responsible neighbor.
My one additional comment that I didn't say earlier is there's a bullet talking about the requirements for, the Planning Commission made a recommendation that the shelters provide a list of things, address neighborhood impacts, the community engagement plan, scope of services, that whole list of things. And I'm pretty sure I read in here that we could require that for permitted or conditional use, either one. We could still have that as a requirement.
That's correct.
So that community engagement and all of that kind of stuff, even for permitted uses.
Just like with marijuana, we have a separate set of provisions that the marijuana businesses must adhere to, even though they're permitted.
Okay.
I would say my one concern is that if MUC1 was surrounded by other MUC1, that would be a difference. We have a non-conforming site in McLaughlin that is surrounded on all sides except one by residential uses, which is, again, not really applies. So I think, again, however we want to craft a conditional use, the criteria, I don't see any reason to change it. But if we want to look at a different sort of a fee structure for these facilities, I am totally open to that, but I am adamant about some sort of review.
I don't disagree. I think right now it's a conditional use in every zone that is permitted for it to be a conditional use in, right?
No.
Yes.
So it would be a conditional use in residential zones, mixed use corridor, and mixed use downtown. But they would still require a conditional use permit and the hearing before the planning commission,
Correct.
which could be appealed to the city commission.
Yes.
So it seems like there's plenty of process there.
There's process, there would be process.
So is there a motion, a suggestion?
If the planning commission said it was allowable, what action could the city commission take?
The city commission could deny the conditional use permit.
On what basis?
On
Basis of the criteria.
So for conditional uses, the planning commission is the final decision maker. The city commission always has the ability to pull up decisions if you want to be the final decision maker.
Or it could be appealed from the
Or an
planning
appeal.
commission.
So you can see it if you want to.
So if the neighborhood is concerned about it, they could appeal it to the city commission.
That's correct.
Ask us to pull it.
Yeah.
Usually there's criteria that aren't met, right? So then, let's say it was item D, isn't met, so then you're usually limited to that item.
Right.
So where is the list of criteria?
Exactly.
It's in our conditional use requirements. I can list them for you if you like. But it just, generally it refers back to impacts of conditional uses. So it talks about how they comply with our comprehensive plan, what are the transportation impacts, things like that. They are.
Rachel, did you have some suggestion for which zones in residential that would be acceptable to you? Because I agree with you, I don't think it should be allowed in every single residential zone.
I said conditional uses for medium, up to 10 residences or beds. I'm not sure if we're calling them residences or beds.
Beds.
And high density, 11 plus beds. So that would be kind of a conditional use that would be reviewed.
So you're saying, but if they would be prohibited in any single family, or is single family the only zone?
It's low
So-
density,
Recall that there's single family also allowed in medium density residential.
yes. So it's more about the density.
So that'd be R5 and R6, so 5,000 and 6,000 are your medium density, single family residential zones.
R5 and R35.
And
Or R35,
3.5,
sorry.
right.
But it would not be allowed in R2.
It would.
She's saying.
Well, I said high
conditional use,
density, so
high
that would be
density.
So
R2, would be
R2, okay,
11,
yeah,
11
right,
plus
right.
beds.
So you're saying anything that's R10, R8, or R6, it would not be allowed?
Correct.
I'm okay with that.
Well, we have a lot of single-family residential zones in the R3.5.
We do. And I believe we've had one cooling or warming shelter in the residential 3.5 when I asked you about it.
We did have one approved, but it didn't
It was an-
operate very long, but yeah.
Yeah.
But
And
we also have several group homes that have come online in the last 10 or 15 years, are smack dab in the middle of residential zones and haven't really caused any issues that I'm aware of.
My thought on the,
That's not the same as.
right, my thought on the MUC, what I liked about the MUC zones was that they were generally following transit lines and along services. So folks that need access, easy access to grocery stores, and hopefully if they're transitioning, they're on corridors.
There are
You
no
know,
grocery
versus being
stores.
plunked right in the middle of a subdivision, a residential subdivision.
Well, the MUC in my neighborhood is not, it's on a transit line, but is not close to grocery stores or anything else.
Yeah, I will say, I did look at the Farthest Heart location, and I'm not sure why it looks like that property was rezoned or some special case was made for that property, because it does look out of place. I don't know if you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, do you mind going to there's a zoning map?
It used
Do
to
you
be a
wanna-
bookbinding company. It was when I
This one?
moved here.
Yeah, and also was the sheriff's,
Community corrections facility.
And the ESD at one point.
Yeah.
yeah, so here's a map of the zoning designations.
Educational Service District.
Okay, funny boy.
The various shades of yellow or the low density residential, I just want to acknowledge, you heard a lot of testimony regarding churches and the connection with churches. And so there are a lot of churches in those zoning designations. So the low density residential that you're talking about prohibiting in are those, the light yellow, the mustardy yellow, and then the bright yellow as well. And then the MUC zoning designation is the pink that is sort of in the middle of the map that's on Beaver Creek Road, as well as the orangey color next to it, which goes along Warner, Milne, and then up 7th and Malala as well. Mixed use downtown is the greener color, which is basically the bottom shelf of the city. So those are those general locations.
And then there's a little bit of purple right at the top of the map, which used to be Flo's Diner and the ESD. And now there's a janitorial service in there.
You're talking at the intersection of
Where?
12th and Washington.
Yes.
Oh.
That's sort of anomaly in that particular district.
I mean, there's clearly anomalies. There's little squares that I can see, plunked in. I mean, I don't know that we're going to go back and change history. We are where we are.
I'm not suggesting that.
We can be unhappy about it. I don't know how we could.
So why don't you craft a proposal, Commissioner Lasmith?
I have one quick question. Is there a good way for us to tackle religious institutions?
In what regards?
Where it's not a zone, but we could allow religious because they often are service providers that stand up in our community when we need them, to offer the warming and cooling shelters, maybe like they're trying to tackle these emergency needs or when there's temperatures high and low, but because they're not their own zone, I'm not sure how to address those.
Many religious facilities are conditional use in residential zones. And
Well,
if
it's
they, and
technically conditional use in every zone, right? For churches?
no,
No, not in
certain commercial
industrial.
zones is by right. So if they expand the mission of the church to include shelters, potentially that is an expansion of the conditional use and might trigger conditional use here in that situation.
We could do a couple of things. Some are more complicated than others. You can keep a provision in there for emergency shelters and use that, or you can do what have been done the last couple of years where you exempt planning for some special case if there is an emergency that's needed. We could write something in the code. There's a definition of here of warming and cooling shelters. We could somehow take a look at if that can be connected.
Could you change the definition of churches to include that use?
Yeah, we can change the definition of churches to include shelters as well.
Nope,
Well, not,
Yeah, we can.
we can, but I don't.
That would mean
I
that
don't think you mean shelters, you mean like if we pick the warming and cooling, the warming, cooling.
Warming or cooling, we
You know,
can
the-
add warming or cooling to
the
the
sliver.
definition of religious institutions.
Right.
Which would make that a conditional use. That would work.
Give me a proposal.
Oh, good Lord.
I can't do it.
Well, just, or do you want us to craft something?
Well, I think we've tackled most of it. I think we've tackled transitional housing. I mean, I'm not sure that we're all in agreement on definition, so. And I think Commissioner O'Donnell's still unhappy about the
You don't
timing.
I'll be quite honest, I don't think the definition is sufficient as to term limitations where you can come out and go back in and start the clock over again. And quite honestly, I'm not gonna put it, if it's my vote, I'm gonna vote no on any of these in residential neighborhoods. I don't care if it's 2.5 or 3.5. Why should those people be held to a different standard than the rest of the residences? I just won't do it. If you wanna do it mixed-use commercial, I'm fine with that. As far as shelters for cold, I'm fine with what we've done the past couple of years. We're not unfeeling human beings, but I don't want to create something that causes downstream difficulties for us.
Do you think you have enough information, staff, that you could bring us back something that we could fine tune?
You want to try and summarize what you've heard?
Well, I think it would be good to hear where others feel on the residential piece. Obviously,
My
Commissioner
concern about the
O'Donnell's-
residential
yeah.
piece is that we're gonna run into, at some stage, we're gonna run into the Federal Fair Housing Act. That's what I'm concerned about.
Okay.
And let us run into it.
Comments? So, do you guys, oh, go
No,
ahead.
I agree
Let's,
With,
having staff bring something back, but I don't think that we can, the same points that the mayor's made, I feel concerned about, but.
So are we building off of Commissioner Lyle Smith's
Right.
proposal?
yeah,
And then
I
you
think that's the
have,
closest we got.
but there
and then
seems, so
we
there
have-
seems to be consensus about the commercial and the mixed use downtown as a conditional use?
yeah, these are always a conditional
Everyone.
use.
Okay, so
Every
there,
time.
so there seems to be some consensus around that. Religious institutions, the definition to allow,
Warming shelters.
Warming and cooling shelters,
okay,
and with specific temperature ranges.
okay. And then we have the question, that's kind of the outlier that needs to, at some point, have a motion and a vote on it. Well, all these do obviously, but the residential component, whether it's R2, R3.5, or not. Is that somewhat close?
yeah, I was trying to, my proposal was to try to split the difference. The staff comment was, conditional use up to 10 residences in all residential areas. I wasn't willing to go there. So I was trying to find somewhere in the middle. I'm not married to that, medium and high density thing.
Let me ask you a question. If someone were to open a 10-bed shelter or to attempt to open a 10-bed shelter in the Barkley Hills neighborhood, they weren't taking any government money. All of their financing came from the, donations or whatever the case may be. Are they still providing a service?
Right, what is the definition of a service? Where does it start? Is a simple provision of a bed a service?
So our definition of shelter identifies a congregate facility designed to provide housing to shelter families and individuals offered on a short-term basis. So when we see someone stay at a place for more than 30 days, that's the tipping point where you're then just a single-family home, you know, you have a lease or something for 30 days or a month-to-month lease. And so shelter.
This is where we're wading into this quicksand of not really understanding what's going on.
Right.
And the story, and in some of the places, the story has been changing on a daily basis, so we have no idea. I'm like Frank, I'm willing to run it right up against the Federal Fair Housing Act, but I'm really concerned about all of the unintended consequences, and of course, we can't think of them all, but I think we have Roosevelt Street as a classic example of unintended consequences.
Well, but
that we
Roosevelt
then-
Street isn't a shelter. Roosevelt
Well,
Street.
it's something.
Well, I agree with you, it's something, but unfortunately, it's something that we can't regulate.
Yeah, it's something, I don't know what it is.
And that's the position I don't want to get into with the decision on this.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of. See, the reason I kind of like Commissioner Glass-Smith's point is that if we do allow it in, you know, some residential zone, whether maybe it's only R2, or maybe it's only R2 and R3.5.
Yeah.
But if we allow it in some zone, then we're much less likely to be attacked by the feds by saying that you're just not allowing it at all in the residential zones.
I'll tell you what, if we were attacked by the feds, we can.
It's not attacked by the feds, it's using the federal.
Whatever you want.
Yeah,
If we came under the scrutiny of the glorious federal government.
So,
Wait a minute, I want to say
okay,
this.
yeah.
Go ahead and finish, sorry.
Is there anybody that can say that this community has not done more than any other adjacent community in this area?
No, but as
Tell me
Bill,
that's not some partial, some defense to our
as Bill and
goodwill?
I have discovered over the last 40 years or so, while that may be true, you never know what a judge is going to decide.
Exactly.
And those guys are as unpredictable as cats in a,
And it doesn't prevent legal challenges.
right.
I don't care. There's some things I'm willing to fight for.
So
I understand.
can I return to the so you read off, Mr. Ray, the definition, your definition of shelter, and I was actually recommending the definition that you provided by somebody, Homeless Solutions Coalition of Clackamas County, I think, who derived their definition from HUD, that says means a project that has its purpose facilitating the movement of homeless individuals and families to permanent housing within a reasonable amount of time, usually 24 months. Transitional housing includes but is not limited to housing to serve deinstitutionalized homeless individuals with mental or physical disabilities, or homeless families with children. And I think as part of the conditional use, part of one of those things, and that's the list of things that they have to provide to us, is how they are going to determine who they shelter, right? That was one of the things in the long list. How they were going to determine who comes in, what qualifications do they have to meet, and all that. And that would be a potential checkbox that if they didn't meet those criteria, then the planning commission could deny it. So if they can't prove in the conditional use that, or in that required documentation, that they are going to provide services and that they're going to, they have a plan that they are intending to service these individuals and have a plan for how they qualify, like how they meet those qualifications, then their application can be denied. Correct? Did you follow that?
I think it has to
We
include
can write
providing a
criteria,
bed.
we can add, we can, yes, we can make criteria that apply to shelters and, yes.
But I mean, that's the only way for us to get it, seeing how are they determining and how are they ensuring that they are serving the homeless? Otherwise, why are we even having shelter conversations? Then we shouldn't even be going down this path of allowing them. We either have to say, we allow them, and you need to show us how you're gonna meet these criteria that you're sheltering homeless people. Prove it to us. This is your plan, this is your community outreach, this is, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, I'm not sure why we're even talking about it.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I just think that the service also, obviously is also providing a bed. That's part of the service. They're
sure.
finding a place for them to sleep.
Yeah.
And to me, that can apply to more than just that.
But that's exactly where, and there's a whole homeless industry out there. So if we try to be too restrictive on this, then we're inviting a lawsuit from one of those groups because that's what they're there to do. That's all they do. So, I think we're much safer ground if we allow them in with a conditional use in the R2 and the R3.5 zones with the conditions that Commissioner Lyle Smith has put on as far as criteria are concerned.
Yeah, it's the one spelled out in the documentation.
I stand by my statement, and the reason I feel the way I do is supposing this group establishes a home and they pass the initial criteria, what agency or what vehicle guarantees on an ongoing basis they are still complying with those criteria?
That's what the conditional use permit is for.
Yeah.
Well, who does the inspections? Is it complaint-based? Is it?
It could be complaint-based, or we could have a periodic review.
And you can make that a condition of approval, which has been done many times.
I'm fine with that approach.
Okay.
But I'm still opposed to any residential placement.
I get it.
And I don't mind losing on that.
Do you have enough information now to bring us back something?
I do.
I appreciate Rachel's
Yeah.
compromise, but it also puts an unfair burden on certain parts of the city, particularly 3.5, R2.
Right.
You know. And I'll say for the record, I happen to live in a 3.5 zone. That's what I'm saying, and it's a historic district.
I understand. The problem is that there has to be some balance.
I understand.
So I think we can move on. I think staff has enough to bring us back something that we can look at.
I don't know if this would, sorry, can I just take 1 second? In the conditional use, revocation of a conditional use permit, the Planning Commission or City Commission may initiate administrative action under Chapter 1750 to revoke any conditional use permit previously issued by the city or with regard to lands annexed by the city. Those such permits issued by the county, the Planning Commission, or on review, the City Commission may revoke such permit upon determining one or more conditions attached to the grant of the conditional use permit have not been fulfilled, and the unfulfilled condition is substantially related to the issuance of said permit. And there is a periodic review of conditional uses allowed.
What is the timeline on periodic review?
It's whatever the
You
board
can
is.
put a condition on those or add a
So there's nothing in
criteria.
the code that says every conditional use gets reviewed every 2 years.
That is correct, but you can add a criteria if you want it to be reviewed every 2 years. We'll make that a straight criteria for shelters.
Do you remember the Metro Transfer Station? It had a review every single year. And the Planning Commission and planning staff brought that to the Planning Commission every year for review to make sure there were no issues. That was finally decided that we didn't need to do that anymore because it was operating in compliance, but because they have a conditional use, if something happened at the transfer station, we could call it up and say, hey, you're violating your conditions of approval, we want to review it, so forth and so on.
Okay, so let's move on.
Great, thank you.
Next item is the discussion about lot averaging.
One more thing, do you want us to get back to you if we have some suggestions for I've looked at all the definitions and there's a couple that I'm more comfortable with now than I was before. Should I get back to you about which ones those are?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So this topic is essentially coming back to us as a proposed code for us to look at.
Yeah, so.
Separately or with the big 400 pages?
400 pages unless you want to peel it apart as separate. The idea is that these are the last few items we need direction on. We'll come back with the whole red line. We won't be asking for a decision on the red line. We're asking for you to look at the red line as a whole. And at that point, you can have more discussions to tweak things if you want.
Can we
And
just
then
pull
after
this
that, we'll
one
come
out?
back.
Just have the review and then have this separate because it gets too convoluted. And I think it's too important of an issue to dump it in with everything else. I think we can dispense with everything else, but I think this needs to be,
Well, I'm not sure that it's fully baked. Like,
It isn't.
we haven't fully tackled, like, warming, cooling shelters.
right. That's why I want us to,
And
That's
if
separate.
they're conditional use, I would like to discuss removing the conditional use fee for those.
I thought we
that was
moved
also
on,
an
I'm
option.
sorry, I thought we were on land divisions.
I know, we pulled it back. We weren't quite ready to move on.
I'll come back with the fee resolution with the second reading because we're having, this code includes new types of reviews that we don't have. And so there will be a time for us to do a fee. If you want there to be a zero fee for shelters,
Okay.
I can adopt that.
Perfect, thank you.
Now we're moving on to land divisions.
Okay. So, current code allows for lot size reduction up to 20% to be applied across any lot in a subdivision, and provided that the average lot size for that subdivision meets the minimum lot size for the zone. And a 2018 amendment excludes areas within a power line easement from lot area calculations. As proposed, the amendment would restrict the lot size reduction to 10% and limit the application of that reduction to 25% of the lots in the subdivision. And that reduction could only be applied to lots that are allowing single-family detached.
Okay, I'm gonna beat out on this because I'm gonna lose. So,
Let's just move on.
excuse me, ma'am?
Nothing?
So, the reason we started this process in the first place was to hopefully allow more equitable housing in Oregon City. And that goes all the way from 0 to 100, as far as anytime you build anything, it reduces the cost a little bit of all of the other things that are like it. And so this is one of the tools that a builder has in his toolbox to be able to get as many lots out of a subdivision as he can while still being stuck with the underlying zone. So he can't put more lots on the zone than fit the zone. It's just a matter of the different sizes, so he can work it around and be able to get as many as he possibly can. And sometimes, many times, they can't even fit, in an R6 or an R8, they can't fit the maximum number of lots in that they can because of streets and sidewalks and all of the other kinds of amenities that we require. So I think that what we sent to the Planning Commission last year is a better compromise, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Did you have more to present on this?
Well, there's significant amount of testimony from the development community and with respect to a desire to go back to as much flexibility in lot averaging as possible for those reasons stated by the mayor. And partly because of topography issues, partly because of the difficulty of meeting various other subdivision and zoning standards. When you've got different parcels of land and you don't control other parcels of land. So that's all I'll say about that. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
On page 3 of the same document, in the staff comments, there's a recommendation where you have said, if the city commission wishes to cap the amount of lots, which may be below the minimum lot size, staff recommends a sliding scale based on the size of the land division. I have not heard anything from staff as to how that proposal would work, because I understand the comment that the bullet point above that says that that lot averaging essentially could disproportionately affect smaller subdivisions, which is the majority of our development applications. So if this could have a detrimental effect, I mean, I think for larger subdivisions, it's easier for us to make this, but for smaller subdivisions, I can see where it would have a greater impact.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of our subdivisions in the last few years have been pretty small. We have had years, or when we have a large availability of land, we'll get large subdivisions where the percentage is a little bit more flexible. But when you have subdivisions that are 4 lots or 5 lots or less than 10 lots, which is most common, when you put a cap on only how many lots can be below the minimum, it can make it hard to meet the topography or the land connection. A lot of these standards come in place because what comes first is the priority of roads and street connection and connectivity. So it creates these little like weird nooks and crannies. And when you have a small piece of property and you limit it a percentage, we went back and looked at a couple of old subdivisions, and they would have lost a lot if they were small, because you couldn't have got a lot in that little nook or cranny, just because of the size of the land division. So if you wanted to say subdivisions over a certain number have this limitation, and subdivisions under a different number maybe don't have the 10% limitation, maybe they're still at 20% can utilize lot averaging, you can do that too. So it's, throughout the discussion of lot averaging over the years, there's been lots of scenarios about ways you can cut the pie. But it's just a recognition that most of our subdivisions are small, although there are some big ones, and that this has a different effect on those smaller, more common subdivisions.
Yeah. I would contemplate, a parcel of land as small as 1.5 acres would be deserving of a more flexible lot averaging allowance. And then maybe, from 5 to 10 acres, it gets more restrictive.
Commissioner McGriff?
Dan, I'm going to say that I agree with you on what you stated. If I had seen over time that that's how this was being utilized. Unfortunately, the way that the lot averaging has been used has not been to promote equitable housing. All the smaller developments have nothing on them but single-family dwellings. And at Planning Commission, when we asked one of the applicants to make a slight change where they wouldn't have lost any lots, but make some adjustment to an adjacent neighborhood, we were told point blank, we don't have to. And like I said, if I had seen that they were using this to put different types of housing on it, bigger houses, smaller houses, that's not what's happening. Basically, I support development, but not when development tries to abuse the system, and that's what I think has happened. And I support the Planning Commission's recommendation because they talked about this until the horse was dead, believe me, and you're both nodding. I think when somebody buys a piece of land, they go into it just like anybody else buying a piece of property. They know what they're getting into, or hopefully they know what they're getting into when they buy it. And they need to take all of the criteria that the city has under consideration. We're asking them to come into our city and develop to a standard that we feel is appropriate for our community, not the reverse. So that's where I stand on this. It's about what is best overall for the community and how this works. And I think what the Planning Commission recommended was a reasonable compromise. It's not shutting the door completely. And if they have an exception, there is a process that we have so that they can get more. But they need to show that, not hand it to them on a silver platter.
I guess I'm up. If you were to speak to the people that were here when this plan was first put into place, the ability to allow some smaller lot sizes, it was definitely topography based. It was a consideration that if someone came in and they're going to do an R8 subdivision and they had a couple parcels of land there that they couldn't get that, we were willing to work with them. Unfortunately, and I do agree with what Pete's saying, maybe in the smaller thing we make some concessions, but unfortunately we saw some abuses that were absolutely obscene. And I watched that meeting, and I remember the Planning Commission asking that gentleman why he did that instead of doing a better job, and he said, because I can, not because it was topography based. So honestly, I'm sorry to say, I think it's greed based in many times. I mean, if I have a candy bar and I bought for $1 and I can break it into 10 pieces and sell them, or I can break it into 10, 12 pieces and sell them for the same amount, I'm going to do the 12. So if we have to control the greed factor, then that's what we do. So I'll go with the Planning Commission recommendation as far as reduction in numbers. And if there's a process that if that's not doable, that they can take issue with it, that's fine. But as far as letting this go on uncontrolled, where residents start with R10, agree to R8, and end up getting 80% R6, that's not what this was designed to do. And quite honestly, if I could take it a step further, I would make those lots bordering on, say, an R10, I'd make them transition downward so that somebody that had an R10 doesn't now have 3 neighbors on his back property line. But I won't get support for that, but I'm just telling you that's how I feel. So I'll I stated I'll go with Commissioner McGriff's statement.
Commissioner Smith, you got any?
Do we have a motion?
I would so move. We adopt the planning commission recommendation.
Second.
Moved and second, further discussion?
Question?
I just want to make sure that the other piece that the planning commission recommendation states is that the limit reduction to lots that are proposed for single-family detached homes. So this would only apply to single-family detached homes.
Yes.
Just want to make sure that we're clear that that was part of the
Yes.
planning commission recommendation.
We have a motion.
Motion and a second, call a roll, please.
Commissioner Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Nay.
Sorry, I don't have,
Okay.
I have the presentation up. I didn't click my
No worries.
box there.
Next slide, please. So we're discussing,
Okay, we're gonna take a break.
okay.
Thanks.
All right. We're getting through stuff.
We'll come back to order since everybody's up here. And next up, we have minimum off-street parking, Mr. Walter.
Thank you. So the Planning Commission recommendation with respect to off-street parking for accessory dwelling units and these other units was to require a minimum of one space for ADUs, a minimum of one space for 2 units of internal conversions, and 2 spaces for internal conversions of 3 to 4 units, and 2 spaces for 3 to 4 plexes. This principally affects, low-density areas, and we don't know the impact of it, but, requiring off-street parking has been discussed as unnecessary in certain situations, particularly when there's sufficient on-street parking and a full street in front of the development. However, this is the Planning Commission's recommendation after a significant amount of discussion. So.
Okay, I'm gonna make a comment and suggestion here because the legislature is currently looking at legislation. So, and it's likely to preempt anything that we do here. So I would suggest that we put this particular piece on hold until after the legislature gets done. Because it's likely that they will prohibit any off-street parking kinds of legislation. That's the way it reads currently. And given the state of the legislature right now, it's likely, since this is one of Speaker Kotek's big priorities, that it's going to get through. So rather than go through a bunch of machinations on this right now, I think this is one item that we need to just put on hold until after the legislative session is over and see what they tell us that we have to do.
I would like to comment, I don't agree with that tactic only because that legislative bill is going to completely, what's a tactful way of putting this?
You don't have to be tactful.
It is going to completely ramrod our single-family residential zoning and our zoning densities and stuff like that. So, I mean, we've got a couple of months. This is just parking. This is not talking about, I mean, we've already covered internal conversions, duplexes, 3 and 4, all that kind of stuff in the zones, which is part of that bill as well. So I don't know why we would pull this one out as not tackling it as well.
Because we will meet, our code will meet the definition of what's currently in the House bill. Because we are allowing those uses with some restrictions in single-family residential zones.
Right.
But they're also talking about, because obviously cities want to find a way to, work around that, and most cities are using this parking as that thing, and it's, now tell me if I'm wrong, Bill, but if they pass this as state law, and they say you can't do, parking requirements, is there anything we can do about that?
That bill, as I understand it, is now in dash 11, which means it's been through
Oh, yeah,
the ringer, and we don't know exactly what it's going to come out with. And so, as I understand the current language, it would prohibit the city from requiring parking for ADUs. I could be wrong, there's been so many moving parts to that bill. I don't think it gets to internal conversions and some other things, but that could change as well. But if they come out and say, city, you cannot do that, generally the answer is no, we can't do that,
Let me ask this, is there a benefit for us having our position in place prior to that law being passed?
I don't think it's going to be grandfathered. I think it would not be, but, there is a possibility that law changes, 2 years, 10 years, and then our code would be enforceable. What's the benefit there? I don't know. I think it's really, do you want to set your policy now or not? And, you can certainly have something in your code, but if it's preempted by state law, it's preempted.
I would also concur with what Rachel said, that I have a real problem with the state preempting local governments from doing what they feel is best for their community.
As do I.
And I know you do, and I think all of us feel very strongly that we're a home rule city. We existed before the state of Oregon exists, and I think whatever they try to do, it's irrelevant to me. I've been following that bill as well, and I've mentioned to our state representative that I think that that is not the way to go. I don't think we're trying to prohibit ADUs. I think we're supporting them, and I would move the Planning Commission recommendation.
Be adopted?
Yes.
Which, is this the planning commission recommendation?
Yes.
That is the planning commission recommendation.
I'll second that motion.
Further discussion?
Question.
Call roll.
Sorry, who first?
Commissioner McGriff, Commissioner
Second
Smith.
no,
Commissioner
Commissioner O'Donnell, sorry.
It's easy to confuse us, I know.
You're both good looking,
Well, it's just the,
Commissioner Rachel
I get
Lyle
it.
Smith,
No.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
aye.
and Mayor Dan Holliday.
no. Motion carries, moving on.
Next slide, please.
Maybe.
Oh, I can do this now. Great. So with respect to this issue, this is a proposal for adding an additional factor during the consideration of annexations. If there is significant site grading or tree removal since the date of application. There has been concern about tree removal in the county prior to annexation, having a detrimental effect on the overall character of the neighborhoods. And staff had suggested not including this topic in the code amendments pending a complete review of all tree regulations in the city so that we would have a clear and consistent policy. Given that we cannot currently regulate tree removal in the county without changing the county's code, having an amendment such as this is a good option. There could be a scenario where the same property would be allowed significant site grading or tree removal once it's annexed under city code. This could have the effect of hindering the efficient redevelopment of land that is designated for urbanization within the UGB. However, we would defer to the commission on this.
Did planning commission put forth a recommendation on this?
Yes, this is a planning commission recommendation. They strongly encourage that we work with the county to discourage tree removal on properties within the UGB prior to annexation.
And you guys attached
consider-
this Exhibit B information about Clackamas County's zoning development code, which I reviewed.
I want to talk about that. Okay.
Who wants to go?
I move we adopt the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Let's go back to the report and review that so I'm clear, because I know I read it and we had other examples cited, talked about significant tree removal, and then you read and significant tree removal is 3 trees. You know, so I need to go back a moment and read the recommendation from the Planning Commission.
It seems to me that while I understand where this is coming from, I went through the county's process, I don't know, it must have been 10 years ago now when they tried to do a countywide tree ordinance. And what ended up happening during that time that they were considering a tree ordinance was about 50 acres of land was cleared in the county in anticipation of them maybe passing that ordinance, which never did happen. It eventually was just thrown out. So my big concern here is that when we say significant site grading or tree removal, and I hate words like significant because they are so subjective, since the date of application, well, typically people who are developing land, they don't buy it in January and submit an application in February. So if we had this in our code, what those people would do is they would buy the land, clear cut it and grade it, you know, under the county standards for 2 years, and then go ahead and make their application. We just don't really have any legal authority to control this particular action. And I especially hate things where it requires staff to make a a decision about what is or is not, quote, significant.
Okay, I just want to clarify too that in the code amendment, we would define significant as greater than 50% of the forest canopy being removed.
Okay.
Probably using aerial photography to make that determination.
And the other thing is that this is an annexation factor. You're correct. It's only applicable from when you submit an annexation application to when you get a decision on an annexation application. And it's a factor, and you just need a positive balance of factors so the commission can weigh this as heavily or as lightly as you choose.
Commissioner McGriff, on what page is the planning commission suggestion?
On page 5 of, wait a minute, no, excuse me, not on page 5, on page 4 and 5 of the, I'm looking at the April 24th, 2019 comment and the other page, excuse me, sorry about that, and the May 15th document. I'm looking at both of them at the same time.
Going back. That's shelters.
It's, the county's tree material is kind of in the middle of it. And then if you go to the chart,
Okay, I found it. Thank
Found
you,
it?
with
Okay.
Commissioner. It's on page 4, second item from the bottom, planning commission recommendation.
they're just
So I know
saying
that
add
this
a
also
factor.
excludes farm and forest practices.
That's correct.
So does that mean any property that is zoned by the county as the, was it urban forest or rural forest or like?
Timber.
Or timber? How does that, so you also included as an exhibit the county's code.
Yeah.
Rachel, what we were talking about with that regard to that is some properties have farm and forest deferral. They're in the UGB, they are not going to be zoned FF5 or EFU 20. They're going to have farm forest deferral if they have that. That's a whole different ball of wax. We're talking about properties that don't have that, where they just go in and just wholesale, well, do what you see in this picture. Under the deferral, you have the right to cut your Christmas trees. If you're raising timber for commercial purposes, you have the right under that deferral to do that. And we're not saying, the planning commission wasn't saying that those people, that would apply to them.
The reason I'd be comfortable with this planning commission recommendation is the wording. Simply says that add a new annexation factor which allows the commission to consider. That's all it says. Doesn't say that
You can't do
it
it.
disqualifies you. You know, my interest is, I don't want excessive water runoff. I don't want a situation where existing houses at the bottom of this development now have water in their basements. I want soil stability. So I don't have a problem with this simply because it's just a consideration. It's not set in stone that you will not be eligible for annexation.
All right, it's one factor.
Yep.
That's why I made the motion.
Well, having made the motion, I'll second the motion.
Okay, then we second it. Further discussion? Call roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle-Smith,
No,
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
and Mayor Dan Holliday.
No. Okay,
Okay, the final items were items that were sent back to the planning commission for further discussion. And I'll go through these three with you. The items that are still under discussion with the planning commission are the discussion about the mixed-use downtown height limits, and as a part of a separate process, developing a more comprehensive short-term rental process and permitting procedure. The Planning Commission recommendation on removing owner occupancy for accessory dwelling units passed. They wish to remove the owner occupancy requirement, but continue to develop a more comprehensive short-term rental process, but not hold up this current amendment proposal.
Let's take that one. Do you want to go through these one at a time?
yes.
Yeah. Clear direction.
Okay, so is there some discussion on this?
think the planning commission made a reasonable request, and I think we should approve it.
And for once, I still feel strongly about owner occupancy. I realize it would only be enforced on a complaint basis, but it guarantees that we have a solid neighborhood, that if the owner does not exercise diligence and it becomes, and I realize there's other things we can use, nuisance type laws and such, but I'll make the statement and let the vote fall where it may.
Mr. Last Smith, you got anything?
No. I'll make a motion to approve the planning commission recommendation to remove owner occupancy for accessory dwelling units.
I thought, Denise, didn't you just make that motion?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded for discussion. I just want to say one thing, and that is that every time we put some new regulation out there, we have to figure out a way to how to enforce it. And the thing that I hang up on this is that I don't know how we enforce that one or the other of the dwelling units has to be owner occupied. I just don't know how we do that. And there are literally hundreds of houses, if not thousands of houses in Oregon City that are rentals that aren't owner occupied, or maybe a fourplex that the owner lives in one and there's three other units. So I just don't see how we enforce it. And that's my biggest thing. And I think you might also run up against, constitutional law as far as what somebody, if you say you can build an ADU, is there a way constitutional to say that you have to live there?
Well, other cities do it.
So with that, call roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
No.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
And Commissioner Denise McGriff.
I'm going to go with Commissioner O'Donnell on this because I understand where he's coming from, and I'm going to vote no.
And Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. Motion carries. Next, please.
Second to last item, the planning commission, after discussing a variety of possible notice area possibilities for the mail public notice, and also considering the efficacy of those mail notices, and after considering the various additional noticing methods that the city employs to provide information about proposed land use actions, the recommendation was to retain a 300-foot mail notice area. And that was after looking at some geographic maps and how many additional properties that would take in. The state law minimum is 100 feet. The city has used a 300-foot mail notice area since 1954. The county uses a 500-foot notice area. They are for properties that are outside the UGB, larger parcels, and city limit. So this was a pretty clear and cohesive discussion.
When we mail these notices, is it this like, there's the neighborhood association, what does the actual notice look like?
An actual mail public notice has to include certain things under state law.
Right.
And that includes the things that are required to be on a public notice include a listing of the criteria.
But you don't have one of those notices up here?
No.
Oh, it's very small. It's up on the white page at the very top. There.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the notice.
Yeah.
Our code also adds additional requirements that need to go on a notice as well.
So when this goes out, is it in an envelope?
Yes, an envelope. It's a trifold in an envelope with a map on the back.
And
It typically includes the map of where the property is, as well as a layout of a subdivision or a picture of the building.
Subdivision or the site plan, yeah.
further discussion?
Could I make a friendly amendment? I support the Planning Commission's recommendation, but I think when we have something that occurs in one of the concept areas that maybe we could look at a larger boundary because the concept areas are so large. And we could, I'm not sure what that number is, 400 feet, 500 feet, but just for that particular area. I also want to be supportive of the chair of the CIC, supporting keeping the list of attendees, because again, neighborhoods that I'm familiar with as part of their minutes, they do have those lists attached. And so you know that you have some accountability between both parties, not just the applicant saying that I had the meeting versus the neighborhood saying we had the meeting. We had a situation that came up where we had an applicant saying we had a meeting, but the applicant actually misrepresented the lot that we were talking about, and I myself was involved in that. And when we got their application, it was like, wait a minute, that's not what we talked about, and I had minutes to document that this is what we talked about versus what they had said. And it was just a mix-up, but these things can happen. So I would support, us keeping it. And I will say in defense of the staff, that the land use notices are very clear. They're lined out section by section about what is going on, what is happening. You always have the opportunity to get more information if you want it. It's there. There's so much information, it's almost too much information. But I would rather have too much information that people can access in different ways than having less information. So I think you guys do a really good job on getting the information out to let people know what's going on. And as I myself, if I see a notice of land use action sign, I want to see what it says. I find a safe place to pull over, I read it, and I say, oh, okay, that's what it is. So it's a two-way street. The public has to also come halfway to make this work. The city's done tons of stuff. And in defense of staff again, Tom, the notice for a legislative action is required by state law. Yes, it's small. Yes, there's a lot of stuff on there, but there's always information that says, here's where you go to get the simplified version. So you just have to deal with it. We're required by state law.
Further discussion?
So would you guys be amenable to something like that, adding a little bit bigger boundary for the concept areas? Just
That's
because
up
they
to
are.
us, not to
Yeah,
them.
well, I'm just asking them, could they come up with a suggestion? I'm just gonna throw out 450 feet, I don't know.
In defense of staff, I will say, we always try to be the same. We're not setting a different, obviously McLaughlin has some special things, Kaneem has special things. Generally speaking, we try to make the code apply citywide, and adding something, a different notice in the concept plan areas just complicates things further. The fact is that if there is, let's take Park Place, for example, everything that's going to go on there is going to be scrutinized. There's just no way around it. So it's not like anybody's going to sneak things through anywhere. So I say we just go with the Planning Commission's recommendation.
I guess I'd say the 3% response rate troubles me. I don't know if expanding the area increases the response rate. I think you look at the methods of communication. If everybody finds them acceptable, we've not only fulfilled the letter of the law, but we made it clear that people don't have to drill down, don't have to do additional research. Maybe our true question is, why do we get 3%? If you listen to Mr. Mahoney, it's because nobody cares. I don't agree with that.
Well, actually, to a certain extent, I do agree with that, because it's almost exactly the same return rate as any survey. You put a survey out there, a paper survey out there, typical response rates are between 3 and 5%. So you get 3 to 5 responses for every 100 you put out there. But more to the point, I think we just need to keep this thing, on the rails and where it's going.
Yeah, if I can make a comment, I thought it was really interesting that the planning commission as well talked a lot about the written response rate. And you're assuming that the only response to a notice, that the only purpose of the notice is to receive public comment back from the community if they have any comments. So if they don't have any comments, you're not gonna get a high response. They're not gonna mail in a card that says, I don't have any comments. So it's really hard to measure response rate based on assuming that the only reaction or notice or anything that you're getting from the public is only if they submit a response back. And so I have a really hard time basing a lot of decisions based on that response rate, just because I don't think it's a valid measure of the effectiveness of a notice. To me, part of the notice is letting the people know that there's something going on. It's not just that, it's great, maybe they're fine with it, but maybe a conditional use shelter is being proposed, and maybe more than 300 feet around that shelter might want to at least know about it. So for me, it's not just about getting written comment, it's about letting the neighbors know, you know, that something important that you might deem important is happening. I was really surprised. I thought this was gonna have a greater look than it has. This was kind of my idea, that I thought that we should consider it to be expanded beyond 300. I'm willing to leave it here, I guess, for now, if that's where everybody else feels. I don't know that I have a good number. I'd just be pulling a number out. One of the suggestions was made about the type of land use application. Maybe it gets a bigger radius if it's a level 3 application or a level 4 or something like that. A type 1, 2, or 3, you know, like could you set a radius based on that? Because we've already done some analysis as to whether or not this application has a greater impact, therefore it gets a greater amount of review, therefore maybe more people should know about it. So I actually thought that maybe we could have that conversation at some point, or that the planning commission was going to, and they didn't. So
Let me offer a slight compromise here, because I've noticed over the last couple of weeks that our communications manager has started putting out notices on social media about planning commission meetings and city commission meetings and other kinds of
Yes.
things that
As events.
is finally
Yeah.
starting to, get that whole system down. It seems to me that every one of these land use applications that has to be noticed could be put out by our communication staff into social media. That gets way more wide distribution than mailing a notice, because I know that if I get a notice about this paper on land use, I look it up, I just see the front of it and I throw it away.
I don't.
Well, I know you don't, Denise, but that's not the point. The point is, you're not the normal person. This is exactly, this is occupational hazard.
It's not a hazard, but yeah. Anything that comes from the city of Oregon City, I open it and I pay attention to it. So there you go, public.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, I read Phil's last notice on the Chapin Park bathroom thing, so,
Anyway, look, are you ready for a motion?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, I would move that we adopt the planning commission recommendation. And I do want to say, just so you know, Rachel, on the notices of land use action, the neighborhood can send back a comment that says it does not affect them. So they send back a notice that says, by the way, we think this is great, it's fine. And there's a little box check that you can send back in.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded for discussion. Call roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
I
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
and Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye.
And if there's a problem, we can revisit it.
Yeah, I can think of a couple avenues in which this is gonna come back up.
Oh, I agree, but we can bring it back.
Okay, so the last one is Planning Commission recommendation to prohibit 3 and 4 plexes and multifamily in the historic commercial zone, or historic commercial district, which is Kenema.
Right, and the recommendation from the planning commission was to prohibit 3 to 4 plexes as an allowed use, and also to prohibit multifamily use in this fairly small zone, which is part of the Kenema National Register Historic District. This will probably have a limited impact on the overall package of equitable housing options available citywide.
Do we have a better basis to argue this against the state? Should the state come and say that we have to allow 3 and 4 plexes in single-family zone?
It's commercial.
Well, this is essentially a mixed-use zone.
Single-family zone.
Yeah.
One of the arguments that the planning commission relied on was that there really isn't a lot of 3 or 4 plexes or multifamily in this zone right now. So it was really giving a nod to some of the uses. I mean, there's been floods here, so we're a little unclear on what the uses were, because there was a big flood in 1890 and some other.
Oh, you did?
I know some other business, but in the recent history, there haven't been a lot of 3 or 4 plexes or multifamily in the specific area.
They're
Why
pre-existing.
did it sound?
So it's an acknowledgement to,
This is
a
all
nod
this is all
to how it's been in
single-family.
the
This
historic
is
district.
commercial.
Okay. So is there a motion?
I move the planning commission recommendation.
Second.
I have a comment.
Rachel S. Smith?
Sorry.
My only issue with this is that I feel like we're pulling something out. This was not the original planning commission recommendation. Remember, we sent this back to the planning commission. And my issue with this is that if you look at everything that's allowed in that district, I'm not sure why we're pulling this out. I mean, that district currently allows assisted living, nursing homes, group homes, for over 15 residents. So why on earth are we pulling out this one thing of 3 to 4 plexes and multifamily? I mean, I just don't understand why we're going to this length of detail
I mean,
just
if
about
you-
these couple of items.
If you look at it, it was drawn in such a way as to not include, if you look at where Hedges Street is on the right side, so if you go past Terry's house, there's actually a set of apartments right there that are just outside the boundary. So I agree with your assessment.
Those were built in.
I mean, this is a historic commercial. We're not talking about residential.
No.
We're not talking about, I mean,
The neighborhood wanted to further take those other things out as well because they didn't think those uses were appropriate in a historic commercial district. And that was a conversation that the planning commission said was going to be for another day.
so instead of tackling it, you're just pulling out a couple of items.
We were cognizant of the staff's workload with regard to that, and we wanted to pull it out and talk about it later on, which may go back to the current planning commission since I'm no longer there, but that was our deal, was let's deal with this. This is a request that came. We looked at it, we said that makes sense to us. Let's deal with the assisted living and the other things because they're not appropriate for this district either. That wasn't the intent of the historic commercial.
Did you second?
Yeah,
Yes.
I did, but yeah.
So there's a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Question.
She's saying she has a question?
No, I think she's trying to call the question.
I'm calling the question.
I'd appreciate it if you would just let me run the meeting.
It's okay. Let's go. Let's do this.
Call a roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
No.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Commissioner Lyle Smith has swayed me. No.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Aye. What you said?
Aye.
Oh, it sounded more like a question.
I know, I was like, is there more to that?
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
No. Motion does not carry.
Okay, so with that, we have a revised adoption. Sorry. Sorry.
What would you like to do with this?
Well, I think what the commission has said is that we don't want to prohibit 3 and 4 plexes in the historic commercial district.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, the next code amendment will allow both 3 and 4 plexes in multifamily and HC.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
So I have a question. So in a March meeting, we had on our list of things to discuss, the heading was tree protection, removal and replanting of trees. What happened to that item?
I'm sorry, do you want to?
Discussion about tree removal and tree regulation in general is something that really deserves a larger community discussion and a more comprehensive review of all of the chapters of the code that deal with tree removal. So I think the recommendation from the planning commission is to revisit that as a part of a separate process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the city commission recommendation was sort of keep the blinders on this package.
Sideways, yes.
Sideways, not blinders.
So any red line revisions regarding this topic will be removed. We will not be making, you're not proposing any revisions for this topic then?
We're retaining what's in the planning commission recommendation and not adding additional items or discussions regarding it.
So the
based on-
planning commission made changes.
There's some tweaks regarding trees in general. The city commission talked about multiple types of trees. They talked about trees on private property and residential and commercial, as well as street trees. And then my recollection from the city commission's recommendation was to just go with the planning commission's recommendation, and then come back later after we've amended our comprehensive plan, or updated our comprehensive plan, and then talk about tree as a package and how all of our tree codes work with each other.
Trust me, that could take as long as we've just been through just talking about.
Oh, I'm sure. I was just confused because it's not showing on this as we sent it, or that we accepted a planning commission recommendation. So I wasn't sure where it went.
It wasn't pulled aside as one of the issues to be narrowed down and further discussed.
Okay. And then do we need to have a discussion about sign-in sheets? Or do you feel like you have enough information on that one that in the revised code that comes back to us?
There were two items that Ms. Wilhite identified. One was retention of sign-in sheets. It sounds like from the commission, we want to retain sign-in sheets. I'm seeing head nods, so I got that. And then the other one was the request to do the limitation on the time between neighborhood meetings and submittal of a land use application. If you were to look for a proposal on what that time limitation is, I would suggest 1 year, because we have pre-apps are only valid for a year, so if you gotta kind of start over with a new pre-app, so then that would make sense to start over with new neighborhood association
I'm
meetings.
okay with that.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay,
It's logical.
great.
Okay, moving on.
Does the language say that they have to notify or use the current neighborhood association contact list? Or is it that they only contact whoever happens to show up at that meeting that one night? Like, I'm trying to understand.
This is, they are required to go to the neighborhood
neighborhood
meeting that is in the neighborhood where their proposal is taking place.
And then just prove that, the sign-in sheet proves that they did that.
Yeah, there's language. There's also a requirement that they give us correspondence between them and the neighborhood association to prove that it happened, and a summary of the items discussed. So that's why the sign-in sheet was taken out, because we're getting the items discussed and confirmation that it happened.
Okay.
But I heard you, we'll keep it in.
Okay.
Was there something else? Somebody gasped over there when I said moving on.
No, I think it
Are we
was,
done
I think it was.
with the planning commission stuff?
I think so.
We are. Thank you very much for your
Okay,
attention.
thank you.
Thank you to staff.
Then we'll move on to general business. 7A is 19-283 personal service agreement with Plan B Consultancy, Inc. for the owner's representative and construction management services for the First Street Operations Complex. And I personally would change their name, but staff have a report.
No kidding.
I thought that same thing.
I hear that from everybody, but I'll tell you this is the only consultant out of the 7 that we received that I tend to remember their name.
I'm sure you
Whatever
do.
that's worth.
Was that a criteria?
No, it wasn't, but I'm just saying. So typically this would have been a consent agenda item, but I have heard from some of you that you also wanted a project update on timing. So there's a fair amount of information about that in this. There's several attachments as well, but I thought I'd go through this a little bit just to hopefully meet that need and answer any questions you might have. But so, yeah, this is about owners' representative services and construction management. So the idea here would be this would be someone that we would hire to help us deliver the project. And so we advertised for a request for qualifications on March 29th and April 1st. We received statements of qualifications on April 18th. 7 of them were submitted. We had an awesome team of reviewers, including Chief Band, Laura Turway, Assistant Public Works Director Vance Walker, and Assistant Parks and Rec Director Denise Conrad, and myself. We completed those reviews and developed a short list of two firms to interview. Laura, Vance, and I interviewed 2 of the firms, and we agreed that Plan B was the right choice for the project and for the staff who will be most involved with that. We really like their project approach, their past history of accomplishments, and the specific qualifications of the staff assigned as key project contacts. Plan B is also the company that the police department's working with, so we got high marks from Chief Band on how they've been working with them. So Vance and I followed up with them shortly after making a determination. We developed and refined the scope that's included here. And I guess in terms of just kind of schedule, we looked pretty hard at the police department's schedule when we kind of developed the request for qualifications. And as quickly as I'd like to be able to move into a building, it still laid out just time-wise through November of 2021. And we've heard back from several of the submittals and in more discussions with Plan B that most of the firms felt like that was a schedule that could be attained. It was an aggressive schedule, and it really kind of hinged on a couple of factors. One would be land use approval, and so we want to deliver a solid package for that land use approval so we get it right the first time, and I think we're in a good place to do that. The other is how we deliver the project, whether it be design, build, or construction management, general contracting. So if we have to go through a design, build, bid solicitation process, the schedule that we've suggested would be very, very difficult to meet. So
I think, just to put that point out there, I think the construction management general contractor served us very well at the library. It's going to serve us well at the police station. I don't see any reason to go back to the design bid process.
that's good.
I'd agree with
Good
that.
to hear. So if you got any other questions, that's really all I wanted to share, which is we're excited about it. We're ready to get going, and we think they're a good firm to do it.
Is there a motion?
I just
one
had a question.
Okay,
You
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
The concept plan design that were in there, there was a 2-story and 3-story options. All of that is still to be determined, like which option you're going with?
Well, in my mind, it's a 2-story option, not a
Okay.
3-story option. And based on some of the initial comments that we heard from Plan B is, just the cost per square foot price is going to be a challenge to hit anyway. And it would be more difficult if we if we pursue a 3-story option. And I really don't think we function well as we've grouped parks operations, public works operations, and public works engineering. Doesn't fit quite right in a 3-story building.
And is that design what you have, kind of the plan going forward? I mean,
I think that is open for debate, although we've spent a fair amount of time and energy on that layout. We'd like to talk through that with Plan B and whoever that CMGC team is. But
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
it's a good plan.
I guess my only comment that, for what it's worth, you can take it or leave it, is it seems very office heavy. I'm really sort of like, I walk around my office and we have corner offices and everybody else is in cubicles. When I look at that, like, everybody has an office, and that just seems surprising to me, and maybe I'm interpreting incorrectly, but that's just my only comment.
Well, and we'll have some more opportunities to refine things as we move along, because we're still pretty early on. But the only comment I want to make, and then we'll go to Commissioner McGriff, is that just like the police station, I don't want to hear about you talking about more building 20 years from now, if I'm still alive. Because if you do, I'm going to come down here and talk about it. So we want to make sure.
I think I said 50.
Well, I agree. 50.
all the other
I'm just
meetings.
saying, that, 20 years is
You're not gonna be
stretching
here.
my lifetime, so.
Well, but that comes back to that design element, like, if we're building in all offices aren't adjustable cubicles for needing to expand for more staff. So I was just a little puzzled by the design, that it seemed very rigid, and didn't allow for a lot of expansion of
I mean,
offices or
if you go to
space.
Nike or Google or those places, and I've worked in all of those kinds of facilities in the office environment, they may have 8-foot dividers instead of
Sure.
4-foot dividers to make things, but generally speaking, because they are very agile about making decisions about moving divisions or moving people around and changing the space. And so, I would agree with that. Commissioner McGriff?
I just wanted to ask John, what neighborhood association is this in?
It's in Gaffney Lane neighborhood.
And you're going to be closely communicating with them about this, right?
Sure.
Okay, no, not sure, yes, is the answer I'm looking for.
Okay. Is there a particular
No,
piece
I
of it
just,
that you're
I just
interested
want to
in?
make sure that they are in the loop, even though this is not an area that a lot of people may or may not be going to, but I suspect that with more facilities, you'll see lots of people coming to the parks, you'll see lots of people coming down to Public Works, and just want to make sure that they're They're dialed in.
Is there a motion?
I would make the motion that we approve the request for contract with Plan B Consulting. Is that
Yes.
their name?
Second.
Moved and seconded for discussion. Call roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
And Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. I had a request to pull one thing off the consent agenda. It's 8A, 19303, Resolution 1912, Support Transportation and Growth Management Program Grant to update the transportation and land use components of the comprehensive plan.
I did a PowerPoint while we were sitting here, real quick. If you want an introduction, or I can, whatever you need. I'm here for you.
I'm impressed, wow.
Okay, would you like me to answer a question? Okay. So as per your goals for the next biennium, we would like to update our comprehensive plan. A comprehensive plan is a guiding document for the city. It talks about a lot of things listed here, everything from parks to how we approach economic development, transportation, land use, you name it. It helps us, aside from the charter, I think it's one of the most important documents that we do. I think Planning Commissioner Mahoney would agree with me if he was here. All of our code, all of our master plans, everything you see on that list and more is all compared against how it complies with the goals and policies listed in the comprehensive plan. It identifies our vision for the future and how we want to get there. We are proposing to do the comp plan update. The basis, a large portion of this comp plan update is going to be about community engagement and making sure that this document, we hear from all of our citizens, if that's possible, as many as we can, so that we create this vision that is shared by everyone within our community and equally serves everyone within our community as well. Our process for updating the comprehensive plan is a two-stage process. The first one is to do some community education. So we want to talk about what we can do as a city and how we work. And then do a community visioning session. And that's where a bulk of this work is going to happen with the community, is we want to make sure that we reach out in ways that we haven't reached out before. We want to build the capacity of people to also reach out to get community engagement. So it will include a lot of things, which will cost a lot of money. And I'll get back to that in 1 second. And then after that, we'll go through and we'll update our comprehensive plan section by chapter. The lot of money refers to the grant, which is what this resolution is for. There's no one fund source to fund all this, so we split it between 2 grant funds because, again, I want a lot of public engagement in ways that we don't do it right now. And because I want that, it costs money. And so this is a recommendation to support a grant for transportation growth management to pull out the transportation and land use component, get that funded through ODOT, and then we'll do a separate grant through DLCD for everything else. But to the public, it's still one process, one thing. So I'll deal with all the administrative nightmare. The public, it's all one thing. And with that, we request approval. I'm here to answer any questions.
I let Laura know that I wanted to pull this out because unfortunately, my colleague, Mr. Robert Mahoney, has left the building. And this was something that I have heard from him consistently over the last 10 years. And I'm sorry that he left, but this is something that's been really important to him and also to the Planning Commission. My one concern about the transportation component with regard to ODOT is that, as staff is quite aware, myself and many other members of the community have a concern about how transportation and traffic studies and traffic reports are utilized when sometimes community members, as someone who's sitting in the audience tonight, has a difference of opinion and they get told, oh, well, I'm sorry, these are the experts, and what it appears to be is that, well, you don't know what you're talking about just because you live here and you see this, it's your perception. And I would like to see some way that the community has a little bit more ability to affect some of these transportation things. And I can think of many incidences in our community where we got a great transportation report, like for the high school, and that, oh, there was gonna be fine in terms of what's happening on Beaver Creek Road. And I'm telling you, that is not the case of what's really going on out there. And that has to do with the 213 interchange, and it's a bigger picture, but that is a nightmare out there. I don't even go out there for that particular reason when school's in session, because you can't get through there. And there's other areas of our community that have the same sort of issues
Commissioner McGrath?
with transportation. So I support your request. I just hope that we can help ODOT bend a little bit to be more responsive to our community concerns.
Good luck with that.
Well, I'm willing to try. You can fight.
ODOT and Union Pacific. Anyway, the motion and a second, further discussion? Call roll, please.
Was there a motion?
I thought it was,
I did.
Denise made the motion, I thought
Yes.
somebody seconded.
Nobody did. I made the
I'll
motion.
second it.
Okay, now we have a motion and a second, call roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye with the caveat.
and Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. Under consent agenda, does anybody else want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
I move the consent agenda.
Second?
Moved and seconded, call roll, please. Where am I?
Sorry, 1 second. Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
and Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. Do you have any other communications?
Yes, I have 3 items I'd like to.
Then I'm gonna respectfully leave at this point and let Commissioner O'Donnell take over the rest of the meeting.
Okay. Quick update from Public Works Director Lewis.
Thanks. So just 2 things. One, the Singer Hill Road, or 10th Street, that crossing there, that railroad crossing, Union Pacific is proposing to replace the crossing panels. And so that's scheduled to start Friday at 9 a.m. They'll be flagging traffic. They'll have it posted with signage directing folks to go elsewhere. But there's going to be a fair amount of congestion on that route, so
Or
we're
are they
just kind
just
of
doing
letting
it
you
during
know.
the day?
I'm sorry, what?
Why aren't they doing like ODOT does and does a lot of this crazy work at night?
They're doing night work as well.
Oh, okay.
They need to get started Friday, so Friday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. They will be on the roadway.
This coming Friday?
This coming Friday, the 17th. They'll be working nights, though, on Tuesday, May 21st through Thursday, May 23rd, from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So the area will be marked with detour routes for the entire period. So they're going to mark it for detour routes, and they're going to have, reader board signage, but.
And what's the
It's gonna be
detour
busy.
route?
I don't have that in front of me, but my suspicion is it's Washington to 12th.
And what about pedestrians? Because the stairs, a lot of people have been using, I've been seeing so many people just walking down Singer Hill now because of the stairs, so we might
that's
want
my
to wonder
next
about that.
update. Maybe I could talk about that because the stairs are now
Yeah.
open.
I just curious if they're aware of the fact that there might be more pedestrians going down Singer Hill.
Yeah. So I hadn't asked about pedestrians, but I guess the good news on that is that Singer Hill stairs are open now. So
Oh, okay.
the rock removed. I brought a piece of the rock if you
Okay.
want to actually feel the density of the rock. It's
You
pretty heavy
didn't bring us
piece of
little
rock.
souvenirs of the rock for all of
Well,
us?
we could probably find some. There's a few chunks down at the bottom of the hill waiting for you.
I'd like a souvenir rock.
Just
You'd like a
stand
souvenir
Yeah,
rock? Okay,
absolutely.
I got that.
Yeah.
Rocks that size are $5, the larger ones cost more.
Right, they're pretty reasonably priced, so I'll get you one. So all this happened for the most part while I was gone, so I was relieved to hear that it went well.
Yeah, way to duck out, sir.
Yeah, it did work out nicely, although we put 230 bales of hay down there, and I was there. I didn't see any of you there to help buck hay, but I was there to help buck hay.
Did you
We got it
call?
down the hill.
Did you call?
I told you the night
I have
before.
experience bucking hay, I want you to know.
Well, you'd have got a lot more if you'd actually
not.
come down.
I would have
So
joined
we had
in.
230 bales of hay down there, and then we called, PGE was there and Union Pacific was there. We got everybody on board. And the idea was to go up there and actually kind of scale some of the loose rock and then, start working on, pushing the large piece that we were most concerned about. And, while just cleaning some of that loose rock, the big piece fell, is from what I understood, and it landed right where we hoped it'd land, precariously there on all of our bales of hay. But it's such hard rock that trying to break all that into pieces, because it stayed in one very large piece. And pictures that I saw looked pretty impressive. So Public Works and Park staff worked together, and they used some rock breaking tools into the stairs. There was some stair damage to a couple, I think 3 of the pillars. So we've got that marked out, and we're talking to our historic preservation, what are they called? They do all the mortar
guys?
Mason.
You mean Pioneer Waterproofing?
Pioneer Waterproofing to come in and put it all back together for us, so.
Maybe they can use some of the rock.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, that's open. And so that helps solve the pedestrian problem. Also, we'll be going back to regular elevator operator hours.
And then what's gonna happen to all the bales of hay?
They're gone. I didn't ask where and how they're using them, but I'm assuming there's some farmer who's happy with them.
I'm just thinking that maybe it could be used as mulch in some of our park areas, I don't know.
I don't.
No, I think they went back to the supplier, some of them went back to the supplier.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah, because we kept a lot of them in pretty good shape.
Anything further, Mr. Mayor?
Yep, sorry, 2 more things. A quick update from Chief Band.
So I think you saw a lot of dates on this open house.
Yes.
And
I've
we
changed
kept
it.
having to back up. And so I just want to kind of tell you what the plan is there. It is June 20th, 7 PM to 8:30 PM. It is going to start with, we will have 5.5 golden shovels for a quick photo op. You guys, and then we're going to have Ziva Libke joining.
So who gets the half shovel?
And Ziva.
Okay,
I was
so
worried.
the little girl, yes.
I was like, where is
She's
that? That's awesome.
5 years old, and so
That's
it'll be an
awesome.
opportunity if you haven't met Wendy and Ziva. It'll be
really
kind of
cool.
cool to have. We've had them involved as much as possible in little things, and so we kind of want to bring them into this.
Okay, that's also the night that the Rivercrest neighborhood meets as well, because I changed it to the 24th already on my calendar when I got the notice from Katie. So it's back to the 20th?
It's stayed at the 20th because we had the planning commission on the 24th.
Yeah.
So then the open house is going to be, the majority of that time is going to be an open house where the public can come in, walk around the school. That north end, the wing that runs along the apartments, that has been shut down because of mold, so people will not be able to go down there, but they can go everywhere else. Going to the old gym. We are going to be trying to collect memories, and we're going to have a kind of a station where people can go write down different memories they have. We have a couple questions that will end up becoming kind of a permanent record with the city in terms of the history of the school.
You could put some of that in a cornerstone as like a little time capsule.
The school will be kind of in the process of moving out, so it is not going to be empty. They're going to be kind of moving out, so it's going to look like that. And then eventually, we did talk to the contractor, walk the site the other day, and 2 things that have come up. We will have some sort of an observation deck for people to be able to kind of safely go, but yet still get kind of a good view of what's going on during the construction process. We are going to have bricks that we will have that people can come take, just as a memento if they went to the school, that they can come take home. And then there will be a PNC, our contractor, will have a camera up that people will be able to go online and look and just see sort of the progress. And we'll put out that link once we have that. That's all I've got.
Great.
Next, I have an update from Mr. Kabaisman. So this is a follow-up on the question about the status of voter annexation litigation.
Thanks. says, as you recall, Oregon City, as well as a number of other communities in Oregon, had provisions in their charters to require votes on annexations. Back, the 2016 legislature adopted Senate Bill 1573 that essentially, I'll read it to you, notwithstanding a contrary provision of the city charter or a city ordinance upon receipt of a petition proposing annexation, blah, 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 essentially eliminating voter approval for annexations. There's litigation involving the city of Corvallis challenging whether they can do that under home rule. That started relatively soon after this went into effect. It has been briefed before the Court of Appeals. It has been argued, I believe, last June or July. And at this point, all we're doing is waiting for a decision from the Court of Appeals. At this point, there's no opportunity to participate in that briefing or arguing. It's just a matter of waiting. It could come out next week. It could come out next November. There is no timeline. It's not, land use is fast tracked and they've got to make a decision within a certain period of time. There is no time. And so it's just a waiting game at this point. That's really where the status of 1573 is at the moment.
This is not a land use case though, is it?
It didn't come up through LUBA, and it was a declaratory judgment in the circuit court.
I didn't think of it as a land use case.
Yeah.
Anything further, Mr. Conkle?
Well, would the commission like more on that topic?
There's nothing more than, no, that's fine.
Okay, so that's good there. That's all that I have for tonight then. Thank you.
We'll let you know when the decision gets issued.
Any communications from individual commissioners? Commissioner Lyle Smith? Nothing? Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner?
I do. I just wanted to let you know that last night I attended the affordable housing, it was a meeting called Affordable Housing, Understanding the Need and Resources Available in Clackamas County, and it had to do with the bond money that Clackamas County had received. And I will talk to the city manager further about it since I made a tentative invitation to have them come and talk to us about it. But my main concern about the meeting was that they had made a presentation and it was kind of a one-way process, even though they asked us for our comments. I basically told the gentleman, Stephen McMurtry, that I didn't have the authority to speak on behalf of the commission because we hadn't vetted this. And that I also wanted to find out, to make sure that the bond money belonged to Clackamas County jurisdictions, not just Clackamas County. And that was my understanding, that the bond was approved by Clackamas County. And so it's not Clackamas County's money, they're just administering it. And I proceeded to tell them that I felt that meaningful input from all of the jurisdictions was required, and that just having a forum where people were invited by invitation was not sufficient. I didn't say that, I said that privately to him, but I did raise a concern about process and the fact that if it was an only invited meeting, how do other people find out about it? How are the other jurisdictions involved? And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about further with the city manager. And I did have one other thing I wanted to bring up is that it's been on my radar. I have a concern about two properties in the city. One is 14, 15, 17th, not 17th, 7th. And the other property is, the address has been taken off, but I think it might be 822 Malala, but it's at the building that is at the southeast corner of Pearl and Malala. That was the former restaurant that caught on fire. So these buildings appear to be abandoned and derelict, and they are kind of an eyesore. And I would like to really know what we are doing about it, because they've been sitting there, nothing is going on, and it's just, particularly the one on Malala with the chain link fence around it, nothing has happened with it. And do we have an abandoned building policy or a demolition by neglect, or what do we do? Could you just give us some status about what's going on with these buildings and what we can do about it, because they are definitely not contributing to the vitality of Oregon City?
We'll follow up with that.
I can tell you, we have in the budget thing, for some of our goals, one of the goals for code is coming up with, looking at an potential ordinance for derelict buildings like this. Other cities have done that, where if people, they're kind of forced or they get fined if they don't do something. So that is something we're working on.
Yeah, well, they tore down the one building on 7th and Van Buren, and now the rest of the building's still sitting there, and it's, you know, peeling T111, and it's just kind of a mess. And I was looking at it when we did our neighborhood cleanup, and I was just like, oh, wow, you know, it's still kind of, nothing's going on. It used to be a church.
Top of the hill.
I have nothing further, and since I believe that concludes our meetings.
Executive session.
Yeah, and we'll meet in executive session. We'll give everybody a few minutes and we'll meet in executive session.
Thank you.